Silence. Absolute silence. The kind of silence that makes the air feel denser, almost like a sacred cloak resting upon every stone, every corridor, every room in the Vatican. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to wake up every morning under the world's gaze, at the epicenter of a millennial faith, feeling the real weight of the past and future in your hands? Now imagine that emptiness filled not by people, but by a silent expectation, a secret yet to be revealed. This is how the story of Pope Leo XIV begins. A name that emerges not like a storm, but like a dense, subtle fog. He's no revolutionary. There are no fiery speeches or drastic changes, no ecstatic crowds. His election was met with a mix of cautious hope and fearful curiosity. After all, rarely does the fate of millions seem to rest on the shoulders of someone so reserved. Unlike his predecessors, Leo XIV carries an aura of mystery. His steps are measured, his gestures restrained. Within the ancient walls of the Vatican, he moves like a shadow, discreet, observant, almost translucent. The corridors echo only the remnants of his presence, and the staff get used to his almost monastic routine, shunning the limelight, avoiding grand celebrations, always opting for simplicity and solitude. But dear viewer, before we go on, I have a challenge for you right at the start of this journey. If at any point you feel the call of the unknown, the fascination of the inexplicable, or that chill that only arises before a mystery, don't hesitate. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share in the comments what your first act would be if you were in Leo XIV's shoes. After all, Pope Leo's journey isn't just his. It's deep down, a mirror for the deepest anxieties of every human being. Shall we continue? Leo XIV's Vatican is a living but dormant organism. The scent of incense hangs in the air. The distant sound of bells mixes with the quiet creak of heavy wooden doors. Small details mark the routine: the worn steps of staircases, ancient tapestries slightly faded by time, the comings and goings of cardinals through softly lit galleries, respecting the dimness. There are no renovations, no rush, no visible unrest. The world's eyes might search for signs of change, but they find only a disconcerting peacefulness. And it's there, precisely there, that the first hint emerges: the calm before the storm. The Pope himself, in his solitude, seems to sense that something is lurking. He perceives, especially in the cold pre-dawn hours, that the Vatican holds more secrets than any library could contain. Silence, for Leo, isn't just the absence of noise, but a subtle invitation to realities that can't be seen, only intuited. Have you ever felt that sensation? That feeling of being watched, even when you're alone? That something is moving on the edge of perception, ready to reveal itself? Thus begins the new era, not with trumpets, but with sighs, not with lights, but with shadows. It's during the early morning hours that the new pope most enjoys walking. The Vatican at that time belongs only to him and the echoes of centuries past. The guards, respecting his habit, discreetly adjust their rounds to ensure his privacy. No one dares to interrupt what seem to be sacred moments, but that night, that specific night, brought the first whisper of the inexplicable. Have you ever seen your own shadow move in sync with your every step, every gesture? Now imagine the opposite, watching your shadow hesitate, lag behind, or even stranger, move forward when you stop or recede when you advance. That's what happened to Leo XIV on that singular dawn. In the tapestry corridor, in the dim light, he walked slowly, thoughtfully. Suddenly, he felt something was wrong. He looked down, and there it was, his shadow, tracing its own patterns across the cold marble, as if it had a will of its own. Surprised, Leo stopped. His shadow, however, kept walking and disappeared around a bend, as if the abandonment was more than symbolism. For moments, he stood motionless, overcome by a mix of fear and fascination. What meaning could there be? How to explain such a phenomenon in a place where all answers were supposedly already sought? Vatican security noticed the strangeness through the cameras. 2 uniformed guards approached cautiously, hesitantly, but found the Pope alone, motionless, staring at a fixed point in nothingness. Leo, without a word, simply waved his hand, asking them to leave the corridor. His decision was immediate. Nothing would be mentioned, not even among his few trusted men. The secret had to be kept like a veil between 2 worlds. That same night, recalling ancient prayers, Leo knelt in his private chapel and prayed. Not for answers, but for wisdom in the face of the mystery. Among the whispered words, a phrase echoed incessantly in his mind: Not everything that moves is seen. Not everything that is seen is of this world. And you? Have you ever faced something inexplicable and preferred silence to disclosure? Have you ever felt that certain mysteries are, in fact, invitations to deepen your own faith or to test it? The Pope, for the first time since his election, realized that his mission might go beyond visible leadership. Perhaps he was called to be a guardian, not only of the visible, but also of what remains in the shadows. As the days passed, small ruptures in Leo XIV's austere daily life began to emerge. They weren't big events, but almost imperceptible details, the kind that only the sensitivity of someone accustomed to silence could grasp. One morning, upon opening an old missal on his study desk, he found a small piece of parchment folded between the pages of Ecclesiastes. The handwriting, unknown and archaic, contained only one phrase: "Shadows bow when the light stands still." What could this message mean? Was it related to the shadow incident? Was he being watched, or worse, guided by forces beyond human comprehension? Days later, a strange object was placed, without any explanation, under the cushion of his kneeler, a metallic silver ring with burn marks around its rim. The smell of heated metal still lingered in the air, though there was no fire or sign of heat there. The symbol engraved on the ring, a fish becoming a crossing of lights, did not belong to any known Vatican inventory. No staff member claimed responsibility, no entry record, no camera detected suspicious movement. The discomfort was growing. The Pope began to collect these clues: pieces of parchment, enigmatic messages left on chapel benches, small burnt wooden crosses in hidden locations within the inner gardens. He began to dream of endless corridors, where ancient symbols flickered on the walls, and hear voices in Latin, soft as the wind, reciting verses from the scriptures. Each new symbol, each message, seemed to erode a little of Leo XIV's serenity, but at the same time sharpened his thirst for understanding. He alternated between fear and fascination, like someone reading a book whose final pages are yet to be written. The Pope spent hours with the scriptures open, seeking hidden connections between the messages and the sacred texts. The symbol of the fish, the fire that does not consume, the shadows that obey the light. Were they proofs, warnings, or instructions for something greater? Was he the recipient, or merely the intermediate messenger? And you, attentive viewer, have you ever found symbols or messages seemingly destined for you, arising by chance or from some deeper place? Have you ever wondered if you are being prepared for something you can't even imagine? Leo XIV, despite his fear, felt a growing responsibility. It wasn't enough to interpret signs for himself. He needed to protect those who, unknowingly, were also exposed to these invisible threads. The protection of the flock, he thought, perhaps began with understanding the mysteries, not by denying them. Determined to seek answers, Leo XIV began a solitary investigation, careful that no one should know the depth of his unease. He knew that any rumor of supernatural events could shake the already delicate internal and external stability of the Church. Therefore, each step was taken with humility, but also with resolve. The first place to be investigated was the Mosaic Studio, an ancient, rarely visited room where generations of artists had recorded, in fragments of glass and gold, biblical scenes and symbols of faith. There, amidst the golden hues and images of saints and martyrs, Leo felt a slight dizziness, as if each figure was there to observe him, not to be admired. On the floor, under a worn rug, he found a nearly erased inscription, a recipe for creating paints with bone dust and ashes, a symbolic reference to the passage from life to death, or just an echo of ancient techniques. The second stage of the investigation led Leo to the secret library, a place where only popes and their closest advisors could enter. There, among records of visions, letters from past popes, and top-secret documents, Leo found a letter sealed with red wax. It was addressed to the Guardian of the Borders, a title hitherto unknown to him. Upon opening the letter, he read, "When the shadow refuses to obey, seek the space between the walls where light does not penetrate. There, the sign will be given." This message served as a compass. After nights of prayer and reflection, Leo began to explore the lesser-known corridors of the Vatican, guided by dreams that always led him to the same point, a narrow corridor near the chapel of St. Damasus, usually avoided even by the oldest staff members. In a detail on the wall, a small, almost invisible crack allowed access to a hidden, damp space, filled with ancient symbols carved into the stone and remnants of very old religious objects. In this secret space, he found clues that other popes centuries ago had also faced similar enigmas. Small diaries, loose pages, encrypted confessions all indicated not only the existence of the mystery, but a silent tradition of facing it. It was as if the Vatican itself was the cyclical stage of inexplicable events, each pope receiving fragments of a larger mission, a mission that was never completely fulfilled. Can you imagine the responsibility of carrying such a secret? Not just about the Church, but about the very balance between the visible and the invisible. Leo XIV, on that cold night among ancient symbols, made a silent decision. He would not flee from the mystery, as many perhaps had done, but would face it head-on. Not because he was naturally courageous, but because he felt his mission demanded it. From that point on, his relationship with the Vatican changed. He was no longer a guest in the silent corridors. He became, at that moment, the guardian between worlds, and the investigation had just begun. If you've made it this far, tell me in the comments, what would you do if you found such a secret? Share this with anyone who also enjoys supernatural mysteries, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Your participation is a beacon for our work. We'll move on together to the next stage of this suspense and spirituality. Don't close your eyes. The inexplicable is still just beginning to reveal itself. Isolation, however necessary it may seem, can never be complete, not even for a pope. And perhaps for those who truly seek to unravel the enigmas of the invisible, Providence takes it upon itself to send companion souls equally marked by unanswered questions, whose secret experiences intertwine with the very fabric of the mystery. It was on a gray morning, when fog pressed the Vatican against its own walls, that Leo XIV was discreetly summoned to the portrait room where Bishop Dwart awaited him. Dwart was a man with dark eyes, whose youth had been consumed by work in secret archives and contact with apocryphal texts. His face bore the serenity of those who had already lived with the inexplicable. There was no fear, but a kind of ancestral acceptance. Holiness, you know that not everything that watches over the Vatican allows itself to be watched. These were the bishop's first words in that tense meeting. Dwart carried a worn-covered book covered with symbols of unknown origin and recounted, without preamble, an episode from his own experience. Years earlier, while cataloging artifacts in the library, he had seen an ancient crucifix vibrate slightly, as if someone were breathing an inaudible prayer upon it. At the time, he had believed it to be fatigue, but the memory returned when he tried to sleep, along with dreams of shadows whispering passages from Exodus. Leo listened intently. For the first time, he felt that the mystery was not solely his burden. There were other sentinels, equally restless, scattered throughout the Vatican's labyrinths. It was then that the ethereal presence of Sister Beatrice emerged, in charge of the inner gardens, a woman of gentle speech and translucent gaze. She was known for her silent devotion and an unusual sensitivity. Beatrice reported finding, among the leaves of an ancient cypress, small burnt wooden crosses, exactly like those the Pope had been surprising in strategic locations throughout the Vatican. Holiness, there are nights when the trees seem to breathe, and sometimes I hear psalms being murmured by the wind, Beatrice said, her eyes dancing between the light filtered through the windows. It is said that, on one of those nights, the sister saw her own shadow project onto the ground, growing until it extended beyond the garden's boundaries, engulfing paths and statues. It was as if the invisible wanted to touch the earth, to communicate, but hesitated before the incandescent faith that also dwelled there. These accounts, added to his own experience, offered the Pope three important certainties. First, that the supernatural permeated papal routine subtly, almost respectfully. Second, that signs and symbols were distributed among the chosen, forming a silent network of attentive guardians. And finally, that the secret of the papal mission was never solitary. The relationship established between Leo, Dwart, and Beatrice became the pulsating heart of the quest. They met at improbable hours, protected by the dimness and the scent of incense, exchanging accounts, analyzing messages, and creating a clandestine chronicle of the inexplicable manifestations. During one of these meetings, a new fact haunted them. Dwart presented a piece of bluish glass, taken from the Blessed Sacrament Chapel. engraved on it an ancient symbol of protection, almost illegible with time. As he brought the object closer to a candle, the glass seemed to emanate heat, and the flame danced in unnatural movements. The ancients knew. They left signs, clues, warnings. The bishop murmured, his voice steeped in fear. There, among these three characters, the true crusade began to take shape. It was not about solving an enigma for their own benefit, but about preventing unknown forces from passing through the thin veil that separates realities. Pope Leo XIV now found himself surrounded by loyal allies, each bringing fragments of the answer, each experiencing in their own way the weight of the inexplicable. And you, have you ever felt that the greatest mysteries are also shared, even if no one dares to speak about them? Have you ever confided your singular experience to another, only to discover that you were never completely alone? In the Vatican, silence gained new layers. It was no longer just the absence of noise, but the shared secret of three watchful hearts. As the phenomena intensified, it became impossible to dissociate the events from the liturgical daily life. Everything seemed intertwined by an invisible thread, sacred objects transformed into catalysts of the supernatural, and religious symbols acquired an unprecedented, almost pulsating meaning in the Vatican environment. On a pale evening, while the sky painted the basilica in golden tones, Leo XIV found himself before the altar with his ancient rosary. As he ran his fingers over the worn wooden beads, he noticed with surprise that one of them was stained black, as if it had been touched by recent fire. The residual odor of smoke was as palpable as the whisper of a forgotten name. It was at that moment that the Pope felt a kind of electricity hanging in the air, an invisible expectation. He opened his Bible in search of comfort and guidance. The verses from the Psalms seemed to answer anxieties he had never voiced aloud. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. It became increasingly clear. The symbolic and the real were touching. Leo's routine became filled with small manifestations, a crucifix that tilted slightly on the table, as if reporting to an invisible visitor, a crystal ring, inherited from previous popes, that mysteriously chilled when exposed to moonlight, pages of missals that turned by themselves during night vigils. Everything seemed to echo an ancient warning. Where there is faith, there the inexplicable also dwells. In the face of the reports from Bishop Duarte and Sister Beatrice, the Pope began to perform special prayers, seeking not only protection but discernment. He commissioned silent masses, asked for discreet processions, and, in secret, celebrated rituals passed down from generation to generation, unknown, even to the closest faithful. One night, Beatrice brought him a small reliquary, found under the roots of an ancient cypress. Inside there was no traditional relic, but a small fragment of charred parchment. Deciphering it, Leo found the inscription, Lux et umbra, custos inter mundos, light and shadow, the guardian between worlds. It was confirmation that his mission unfolded on planes far beyond matter. These sacred elements, distorted by the inexplicable, nourished Leo's conviction that rituals and symbols are not mere ornaments of faith. They are also barriers, bridges, and keys. The Vatican became a stage where every object was a bearer of stories and powers. From this understanding, Leo began to feel less like a visitor and more like part of an invisible current. He no longer saw the burnt rosary merely as a memory of a strange event, but as a key to entering an ancient mystery, echoing prayers that perhaps would never be fully answered. And you, have you ever held an object in your fingers whose weight seemed to transcend the physical? Have you found comfort in rituals, hoping they might be a shield against what cannot be seen? In the heart of the Vatican, candles burned night and day, not only to illuminate the sacred space, but to draw a thin line between faith and fear. It was as if, with each prayer, the visible and the invisible bowed together before the abyss of existence. With the mystery haunting even dreams and daylit vigils, Leo XIV understood that some answers could not be found within the walls of the Vatican. It was time to seek outside, signs and revelations that only emerge when the soul is willing to make a pilgrimage, not just in faith, but in the very space of the world. Discreetly, without fanfare or entourage, Leo prepared small trips to emblematic places of Christian spirituality. He chose Laredo, a city marked by reports of apparitions, and Jerusalem, the birthplace of all faith's paradoxes. On these pilgrimages, the Pope was not the supreme pontiff, but an anonymous pilgrim searching for the invisible. In Laredo, upon arriving at the church where the faithful often said they had seen the Virgin, Leo knelt before the altar and prayed, "May the veil between worlds, if it is God's will, thin before the truth." It wasn't long before small manifestations appeared. As he lit a candle, he noticed that the flame split in two, forming a double shadow on the chapel walls. An elderly friar named Tomas approached and, whispering, said that for centuries some pilgrims had reported two shadows when the mission is divided. Leo did not answer, but felt the shared weight intensify. In Jerusalem, walking through the ancient streets at dusk, Leo found a letter under the damp stone of Gethsemane. The paper, wet with dew, bore in Latin, "When your shadow departs, follow the path of the olive trees." That night, in solitary prayer, he heard footsteps behind him. He looked back and saw only his shadow, but it seemed doubled, almost genuflecting, like one saluting something sacred and unknown. Each stop on the pilgrimages was marked by small phenomena. A parchment found in Assisi with inscriptions identical to those on the burnt silver ring. A crucifix in Nazareth that, when touched, lent an inexplicable warmth to the Pope's fingers. A dream in Bethlehem where faceless crowds prayed in forgotten tongues. On these journeys, Leo was guided by mysterious letters left on church benches, fragments of nocturnal visions, and brief encounters with almost ethereal characters. There was always the same theme: crossing the threshold, the Pope's role as guardian between worlds, and the implicit order not to try to decipher everything, but to accept silence as an instrument of protection. With each return to Rome, Leo felt he carried more than memories. He carried with him part of the mystery itself, something imbued in his skin and in his thoughts. He knew that no matter the distance, the supernatural would find him, whenever necessary, to remind him of who he was and what mission belonged to him. And you, have you ever sought answers outside your known territory? Have you ever felt that traveling is also a rite of passage, in which parts of your own self are revealed and expanded before the unknown? For Leo, the journeys were not mere displacements, but encounters, with the sacred, with the strange, and above all, with himself. He understood that there are enigmas that do not ask for solutions, but respect, and that there are shadows that only bow when the light, finally, learns to stand still. If you are following this narrative, tell me in the comments what was the most mysterious object or symbol you have ever witnessed. Share this video with those who believe that there is more between heaven and earth than our vain philosophy imagines, and don't forget to leave your like and activate the bell. We still have much mystery to unravel together. The days following Pope Leo XIV's pilgrimages were marked by an even denser atmosphere within the Vatican's walls. It was as if, by seeking answers outside, the Pope had, unknowingly, opened invisible channels of communication, editing the Vatican's very silence with new layers of mystery. The phenomena, once discreet and spaced out, became frequent, almost daily, growing in intensity and leaving traces wherever they went. The shadows, once timid and contained, now seemed to play at being their own matter, as if they wished not only to take shape but to manifest will. On a rainy afternoon, as the Pope meditated in the Sistine Chapel, he noticed that his shadow projected in several directions, indifferent to the single light source. One shadow moved towards the altar, another towards the golden ceiling, and a third towards his own chest, pulsating restless as if it wanted to escape. There were nights when Leo walked through the inner courtyard and clearly saw signs being drawn by the shadows themselves, crosses, circles, lines intertwining to form unknown symbols. Once at dawn, he found the symbol of the fish crossed with lights, identical to the burnt ring, drawn in soot on one of the columns of St. Peter's atrium. These signs were not limited to the visible. Objects began to disappear, and after hours or days, reappeared, in unlikely places, like the burnt rosary that vanished from his room and was found on the tomb of an ancient pope, or the silver ring that resurfaced at the bottom of a chalice during a private mass. Books on shelves opened by themselves to suggestive passages. "There is a time to be silent and a time to speak," read Ecclesiastes. The Pope felt he was being watched, and at the same time tested by forces he could not name. The Vatican guards themselves, unaware of what was happening, began to report strange occurrences. lights flickering without electricity, cracks appearing in newly restored walls, and the sound of footsteps in empty corridors. Many avoided the old corridors at night, fearing something they couldn't explain. Even Bishop Dwart, always skeptical, revealed he had seen a dark figure in the library leafing through a medieval manuscript. But when he approached, he realized there was no one there, except his own distorted and multiplied reflection in a window pane. Sister Beatrice, in turn, found small burnt branches in the shape of a cross, planted in the garden in the exact direction of the sunrise. She felt, one morning, a cold hand touch her shoulders as she prayed. She turned, and again there was nothing but the moon, silent, watching everything from above. Leo XIV began to realize that all of this was not just a manifestation of a chaotic force, but a kind of preparation. It was as if he were being put to the test, brought to judgment before the inexplicable, so that he might be strengthened and become, in fact, worthy of the title he had received. The phenomena were trials, and the answers were not in reason, but in the humble acceptance that faith at times demands a leap beyond the visible. In one of these extreme moments, while praying before the main crucifix, Leo felt the ground tremble slightly. A crack opened next to the altar, and from it emerged a faint smoke that formed words. "Prepare yourself, the wall needs you." It was the first time the message was clear, unambiguous. The Pope then understood that he was not the center of the issue, but rather the barrier between worlds, the sentinel raised to contain what, if it overflowed, could shake not only the structures of the Vatican, but the very faith of millions. And you, watching this account, have you lived through situations where you felt watched, experienced unusual coincidences, or witnessed the impossible? Share in the comments, because sometimes sharing the inexplicable is the first step to facing it. As the inexplicable intensified, the climax of Leo XIV's journey seemed to approach. The Vatican, so accustomed to routine, now pulsed with anticipation. The very air seemed charged, as if all the shadows, all the voices and symbols awaited the moment to reveal the true purpose of that supernatural cycle. One damp morning, Leo awoke to the sound of small bells tinkling in the corridor. He rose, donned his white cassock, and guided by a strangely gentle curiosity, followed the sound until he reached a small chapel he had never been in before. On the altar rested the crystal ring cold as snow, but shining intensely with silver reflections. It was the last artifact left to manifest. As he approached, he felt a weight in his chest, as if his heart was trying to beat to the rhythm of an ancient, forgotten song. As he touched the ring, the piece dissolved in his fingers, turning into dust, and from it rose a clear mist that momentarily drew in the air the message: "This is not your burden. It never was yours." At that instant, Leo understood. All the pressure he had carried, all the secret he had kept, all the trials were not a condemnation. It was not up to him, nor to any pope before or after him, to solve the mystery, but only to maintain the integrity of the wall, the barrier between worlds. The papal mission, so celebrated as leadership, was above all a silent vigil, a humble acceptance of silence as an instrument of collective protection. The Pope, overcome with intense emotion, fell to his knees and wept. Not tears of defeat, but of relief and clarity. He then realized with a mixture of gratitude and reverence that being Pope was less about power and more about service, serving as a wall, as a discreet sentinel, protecting others from invisible battles. Before leaving the chapel, Leo saw, for the last time, his shadow projected on the floor, motionless, silent, but perfectly aligned with his figure. It was a sign that the cycle was nearing its end. Balance had been restored. Upon returning to his quarters, he was greeted by Dwart and Beatrice, who, unaware of the details of the last revelation, felt that a new peace hovered over the Pope and the Vatican. Together they offered a brief and silent prayer, united in the certainty that, even in the face of the inexplicable, their mission was, above all vanity, humble service to faith. And you, faithful viewer, have you ever felt that the greatest answers come in the form of acceptance and not resolution? Have you discovered, in the face of an extreme challenge, that silence and humility are more powerful weapons than any explanation? Don't forget, like, share, subscribe to the channel, and leave in the comments what struck you most about this story so that the chain of sharing and protection continues to grow. The supernatural cycle, so intense and disturbing, ended as subtly as it began. The phenomena ceased. The shadows returned to behave as they should, faithful to the body that casts them, submissive to the light of the rising sun. The sacred objects resumed their usual quietness. The crucifix remains motionless, the burnt rosary seems like just an old rosary, and the crystal ring no longer exists, except in the Pope's memory and heart. Even the gardens breathe in peace. There are no more burnt crosses, no strange whispers in the early mornings. The Vatican returns to routine, but with a new sparkle in the eyes of those who witnessed the inexpressible. Bishop Dwart returns to the archives, more attentive and humble than ever. Beatrice tends to the plants, praying psalms of gratitude and casting understanding glances at the morning shadows. Leo XIV, now fully aware of his role, carries silence not as a burden, but as a shield, a silent guardian, between worlds that at times touch. In a final message, the Pope writes a small note left on the altar of the secret chapel. Silence, for those who guard the inexplicable, is also prayer. Our mission does not end, it merely changes form. Where there is fear, there will also be a shadow of hope, and as long as there is faith, the wall remains firm. And I ask you, in this farewell, what silence do you carry? What invisible mission rests on your shoulders? Don't hesitate to share your reflection, your experience, or that inexplicable secret only you know in the comments. Pope Leo XIV's journey teaches us that not every question needs an answer, and not every answer needs to be spoken. Sometimes all the world needs is someone willing to watch at the threshold between the visible and the mystery. If this story touched your heart, remember to subscribe to the channel, share it with those who appreciate the supernatural and spirituality, and like it so our content reaches more people. Let's continue together, firm on the wall of the inexplicable, because faith, like light, is only complete when it recognizes the presence of shadow. May peace be with you.